Well, no surprise here. In Korea, where they make them, Hyundai and Kia owners of their electric vehicles are complaining like mad with class action suits. Turns out that some of the batteries have started on fire. One guy had an electric motor Kia where the electric motor started making noise and broke down when it only had 1,600 miles on it. They're even talking in Korea about suspending the sales of their electric cars there until they fix these problems. I watched the video and it sounded like that electric motor was a piston engine motor with rod knock clanging away. Amazing, electric motors have been around for quite some time. Nikola Tesla had some pretty bulletproof ones. I'm from Niagara Falls originally. They have some of Tesla's original electric motors there, and they still work. And some of the generators he made way back in the early 1900s, they still work. So, if they can't even make these things right now, how does that bode for having electric cars in the future from Kia or Hyundai? Kind of ironic when you think about it, because what did they have? They had problems with their regular engines. They had to recall a bunch of them because they didn't make them right. Now, they're having problems with their electric motors, and the batteries started on fire. So, maybe not such a smart idea to rush in and buy one anytime soon. And the Koreans, hey, they're getting class action suits now against them for these electric motors and the electric battery started on fire. Not a good example of modern electric technology. They aren't that complicated. I don't know why they have problems making motors. Come on, they're electric motors. Relatively simple. People are saying that they just make them cheaply. The bearing races are wrong, that they wear out and the metal flies are out and they fall apart. That's uncalled for. They've been making bearings for hundreds of years. You think they could still make them right? But no. They're putting them in electric motors and they're not holding up. Cummins Man 91617 says, Scotty, I'm looking to buy an 06 Dodge Ram 3500 dually to tow my fifth wheel trailer. Guy says he rebuilt the entire engine from top to bottom, says there's 5,000 miles. Should even buy one with a rebuilt engine. Cummins diesel engines are excellent engines. I mean, those engines, now I'm assuming you're talking about a Cummins diesel engine. And I wouldn't buy a Dodge with a gasoline engine, but those Cummins diesel engines were excellent. The problem with him saying it's completely rebuilt, who did it? How is it done? If he said he did it himself, walk away. Hardly anybody knows how to rebuild those things other than professional mechanics that are in a very sterile workplace or a factory where they're building them from scratch. You'd want actual proof. Now, if it was a place, go to the place, talk to them. Say, you rebuilt this. What did you do? See the bill of lading, what was actually done. Because when people say they rebuild stuff from the top to the bottom, a lot of times it's just barefaced lies, and they make up the whole thing. So, if he has proof, take it to a guy like me. Check it out first with a giant scan tool and a road tester. We can tell you what shape they're in. And if we say buy it, go ahead and buy it. But don't buy it without big proof and a good mechanic who understands diesels checking it out first. Simpson B says, I got a Ford 3.5 EcoBoost engine. It revs up and down on a cold start after I changed the spark plugs. It didn't before. All right, let's put on our thinking caps here. Didn't do it before. Something was messed up doing the change. Check closely. Maybe a vacuum line came off. Maybe you broke a sensor. Wire's not plugged in right. You want to hope it's not that you wrecked one of the coil-on plugs, because you got to understand, there's coil-on plugs, right? They make the sparks, but they're rubber and plastic, a lot of it. They're sitting on a hot engine. Well, you got to remove them to get to the spark plugs, and you change the spark plugs. I've seen it happen that it will damage some of them. So what you want to do is either get a scan tool yourself or pay a guy like me to hook up a scan tool and look at the misfire data. And if you see that one cylinder, like number 4, shows misfires and all the other are 0, well, it messed up that coil. So replace that coil. That's where these scan tools come in really handy. Now, a cheapo one isn't going to show you all the data. It'll show you when there's a misfire if it does it a lot. But if it does it somewhat, hey, a good scan tool that's $250, $300, that will show it. If you don't want to spend that, pay a mechanic. But if you really want to know about cars, get one like the Innova that's $300. I just got one from the company. I'm trying it out. Man, it has found out what's wrong with cars in 10 seconds sometimes when guys went to dealerships and said, oh, they couldn't figure out what was wrong. So it's the machine and the guy using it. But analyze that first. Read something just stupid, like one of the coils got damaged, because they will when you twist them and pull them out and put them on. It's not your fault. They're hot, they're plastic, they're on the engine, they've been there for years, and when you take it off, Hey, they can break. New to you says, which Toyota Corolla Camry should I stay away from? All right. Well, one, you would stay away from the few years, especially around 2007, 2009, of the 2.5-liter four-cylinder engines because they made the piston rings wrong, and most of them burn oil. Now, Toyota replaced the rings in a bunch of them. If you're buying a used one, if a guy has a certificate from Toyota that says they've replaced the pistons and piston rings, then go ahead and buy it used. The Corollas themselves are pretty bulletproof, but for a very short period of time, I guess it was a couple years ago, they came back out with the Toyota Corolla hatchback. It was basically the Toyota Matrix that they stopped making, but they decided to call it the Toyota Corolla hatchback. Originally, they were called Toyota Corolla Matrix. Then they just called them Matrixes. Well, at any rate, the first time it came out, it had a CVT transmission. They had to recall them all. So don't buy that first-year model. But other than that, the Corollas are pretty good cars. My son's got one with the CVT transmission, but it's got that first actual gear in it. That's the takeoff gear, so it actually accelerates really well. He drives like a maniac, and he loves it, but gets great as mod. So that's the only Corolla you'd really have to worry about. Well, here we go. Owners of Chevy Silverados and other GMs with a 5.3-liter Vortec V8 engine now have a class action lawsuits against General Motors. They're claiming that the engines were designed to fail, and GM knew about it. Turns out that they say they put in bad piston rings. Makes the engines burn oil. Gas leaks past the piston rings. You get oil dilution like those Honda engines got, and then the engines go out early. Now, from my own experience with customers, I saw this so many times. Customers that had the 5.3 Vortec V8 Silverados, bunch of Chevy trucks had them. Mainly 2010 to 2014. Those are the years that it really affected. And they'd go to the dealer. They said, my engines burn oil. And they said, oh, yeah, that's normal. Those all burn oil. Well, guess what? Yes, they do. And why? Probably because they didn't design the piston rings right and they wore out too fast. You remember that Toyota had the problem with their 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine in the Camrys and some of the cars. They had the piston rings weren't right. They burned oil. Toyota ended up fixing a lot of the engines free. Well, of course, GM is fighting this tooth and nail. They don't want to have to rebuild all those engines for nothing. It would cost them a fortune. But the class action suit is saying they knew about it. They knew they were oil burners. They knew they had problems, and they didn't do anything to help the customers out. And they also claimed that the fuel management system also was designed and built wrong, which is right. Those Vortex, the 5.3 Vortexes, they were horrible fuel injection systems as they aged. When they were new, they worked perfectly fine, just like the engines. But when they wear out, just like the piston rings, then they start to have problems and running problems. And that can lead also to engine problems. Too much fuel dripping in, you get oil dilution where gas is in the oil, then that ruins the bearings, the timing chains ruins everything. It's kind of like a catch-all of they had various problems, those are the two big ones, and they're now being sued, class action suit. It'll be interesting to see what happens. A lot of times the judges throw them out, even if they have good reasons, like they did with the one against GM for the Corvette. The wheels were cast instead of forged, and they said, oh, well, that was a design flaw, not a manufacturing flaw, so, the suit is for it's a manufacturing flaw. Well, they did the whole thing. They designed and manufactured these engines, so I'd like to see if they're going to get out of it or whether they're going to have to stand behind the problems that these things had. Well, if you're into fixing up and collecting those old rotary Mazda RX-7s, you're going to be happy because Mazda is now remanufacturing a bunch of parts for them. They call it the Heritage Parts Program. They've done that for the Mazda Miatas because they're so popular that they're remanufacturing a bunch of parts and building parts for them so you can continue to drive your old ones. Now, they started in 2017 with the Mazda Miatas, and they have over 1,000 different parts that you can buy for it now, and they're starting up that same program for the RX-7s. Now, unfortunately for the rest of the world, these parts, and there's 91 of them that they're starting out with for the RX-7s, are only available in Japan. You can't buy them in the United States, so if you got a friend in Japan, he can send it to you. I got people that do that. Don't think people don't. One of my friends in Houston's got a friend in Japan. He needs parts. He talks to him. He gets it and he sends them over in the mail. Not rocket science. Things can always be done. Mazda probably did this because Nissan's doing the same thing with their Skyline GTR. So they want to make it that, hey, you can fix up the old zooming RX-7 rotary motor engine cars too. So it's a little competitive stuff going on here. So if you're thinking about an RX-7, realize you can get parts for them again now. And it's probably going to expand out just like with the Miatas. They've got 91 parts for the RX-7s now. Well, the Miatas, and that was 3 years ago, they started to have over 1,000. So people buy them, people collect them, they're going to make them. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.